Hello and welcome to Gaming the Podcast. My name is John Robertson, joined as ever by Stace Harmon, and this week we are talking about our Game of the Year for 2021. Now, we set ourselves the limitation of picking just 5 games as nominees for this Game of the Year reveal. So we'll go through those now. Stace, do you want to list off your 5 candidates for your Game of the Year 2021?
Yeah, so in no particular order, my 5 candidates for Game of the Year 2021 are Psychonauts 2, Hitman 3, Death's Door, Returnal, and Deathloop.
Nice.
And do any of those have any positions on your 5 candidates list? That's what I'm interested in.
They're a pretty diverse list of games. Hopefully someone likes one of those at least a little bit. Hopefully everyone's heard of them. Okay, so we'll come back to you in a second. I'll just list mine. So mine are Halo Infinite, specifically the multiplayer, which I know is part of a game, but I'm sticking with it. Resident Evil Village, Valheim, GTFO, and Loop Hero are my 5. Also pretty diverse.
So we have
I'd
0
like
overlap.
to say.
So
That's true, yeah, 0 overlap.
Interesting. Which I don't think is that surprising, to be honest. I think we have, although we have similar taste in some respects, and we can talk at extended length about certain games. I think our actual personal tastes probably differ quite significantly. So yeah, we got several different games to talk about.
I mean, I would say that even though we've got no overlap, I do like all of the games on your list. Death's Door was actually really close. Anyway, let's go into the game. So
get sidetracked.
So let's do this. So the format is going to be, so Stace will go through a couple of the games that didn't make top spot. I'll go through a couple, and then we'll do that a couple of times, lots of couples, before revealing our respective game of the years. So Stace, you want to go through a couple? 2 of your nominees that are not your Game of the Year, why they're on there, why they're on this list, maybe not why they're not Game of the Year, because
I liked something else more.
Yeah.
That's pretty straightforward. So I think let's pick Psychonauts 2 and say I think Death's Door for the first couple. Psychonauts 2 is quite an easy. It was quite an easy kind of in for this candidates list. And some of it is simply for how refreshing it feels. It feels like one of those games that only Double Fine could make, and only Double Fine perhaps would even want to make. It is. I know this is a thing now these days for Double Fine, that their kind of reason for being is creativity, is variety. You look at their back catalogue, and it screams that. And I think that is kind of encapsulated within Psychonauts 2 as well. I think there's so much variety in it, so much that's just feels new, not necessarily in the way that you move around the world or mechanically, but just kind of from an ideas perspective. Just the fact there are all of these different brains, the fact that there are even brains, the levels have their own meta narrative to them. I love that. I love that it's it feels like something that is like a breath of fresh air, and it's just a nice thing to sit down and play. And it comes with the added weight for me of asking some questions and being unexpected, which again is it just feels so refreshing. There's moments that I thought were quite were going to be quite heavy, or that something was going down a particular path. There's a particular part in a maternity ward, part of somebody's hospital brain. If you can work that out, if you haven't played the game, that's going to make no sense. Where there are moments of just biting and real just cutting writing that is laugh out loud funny, but it seems that the subject is very serious, but it just made me laugh, and it was so on point about parenthood and expectation and all of these things. So Psychonauts 2 is kind of as I say, it's an easy inclusion. Doesn't do quite enough for me to be my personal game of the year, but it is it's one that I've really loved playing, and yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot to say about it, but we do have a lot of games to get through.
There's just one thing I think it is a breath of fresh air, and it's a breath of fresh air, even though, or maybe because of, I don't know, given that it's a 3D platformer, which is hardly a new genre, but it feels like a breath of fresh air, both in simply the fact that it is a good 3D platformer that isn't Mario. So it feels kind of refreshing and new, almost because it's like an older genre, that isn't very popular anymore, really.
No,
well, there are still, but like, things like Ratchet and Clank, I don't really consider a platform in the same way. It's as much a shooter, as much like a sort of basic shooter as it is a platformer. So it's refreshing in the way that you spoke about, but also because it's, I don't know, sort of a return to form for a genre that's kind of not that fashionable anymore. And also, go on, sorry.
No, I was just saying, and it feels like because of that, because it has history behind it, not just for the genre, but because of the franchise, it does feel like there's been like a maturing of it. And I think it's a 3D platformer that I look at more for its strengths narratively and from an ideas perspective, from a level design ideas perspective, than from specifically the 3D platforming element of it. And that's quite nice, that the strongest thing about a 3D platformer doesn't have to be the platforming for it to be still a very, very good game. And it just feels, I don't know, it just feels like it's good, good on you, Double Fine. Thanks also, for doing that.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next game, but I don't know whether to be annoyed or to applaud you that we literally wrote a book featuring Psychonauts 2 and all about Double Fine. You haven't even mentioned it once.
Yeah, I should mention, by the way, we have a book out.
If you love Psychonauts 20
Double Fine
2,
years going by. Yep.
There's a great companion piece called 20 Double Fine Years that we may or may not have been involved in. Okay, so Psychonauts 2 is the first of your 5, not your game of the year. So
Deathloop was a game that I had quite a lot of anticipation for. I do have a lot of time for what Arcane does. It doesn't always set my world on fire, but I can always respect how well made it is. Deathloop, I feel, was kind of a culmination of a lot of the things that Arcane has done in the past, and it had a real kind of narrative thread throughout it that pulled me through it and that made me want to keep going back to see what was going on. It's a bit like something like Hades, I think, where it's like there's always something new to uncover. And I think it was for what could have been a very, very complicated, like getting lost in the woods kind of what's going on kind of experience. I think Arcane did very well to construct it in such a way that it's the kind of game that you can play for a week or so, go away and play something else and come back and still understand where you are and what you're doing, because the UI is very well designed. The kind of the ideas board that tracks where you are with each thread does a very good job of recapping to make sure that it kind of, I think almost, I suppose the cliched thing almost to say would be that it's like it respects your time. It understands that you are going to play other games. It doesn't say you have to play me non-stop until you complete me, otherwise you're not going to remember what's going on, or you're going to lose the sort of the feel of this, the muscle memory of how to play this game. So I really enjoyed my time with Deathloop. The thing that I would say that part of the reason it's not top of this list is because it perhaps for me did a bit too much of that. It did a little bit too much of like keeping track of everything and hand-holding and guiding me through this thing, that I sometimes felt like I was hitting milestones, or in that very sort of demeaning way, ticking boxes. I was like checking things off a list and doing certain jobs and in a certain order, so that by the time I'd got to the end, what I was hoping was going to happen was I was going to get to the end of the narrative, see the end of the game, and then want to go back and just keep playing and exploring and experimenting. And that didn't really happen for me. And I was a bit disappointed with that. Once I'd got to the end of the narrative, it felt like, oh, I'm kind of done. And I was not expecting to be.
So did you like the start more than the end? or was it not?
No, I don't. No, not really. I liked kind of assembling all of these disparate threads and working out that you need to be in certain places at certain times of the day, which I thought was a great mechanic, a great like notion. If you've got these different locations and they change depending on the time of day. It speaks to that thing that sometimes games try and do with, each NPC has their own set routine, and if you go and see them at this time, they're doing something different. But it segmented it in quite a video gamey way. It was like this isn't real time like tracking throughout the day. Here's the morning bit or here's an evening bit, and they are more discrete. They're like more self-contained. And I think all of that worked really well, and it was nice to see Arcane kind of put together a lot of the stuff they've done previously. So I did enjoy the entire thing. I think from start to finish, I just thought there was going to be more because of the kind of game it was. It felt like I would be more compelled to continue after the end of the game and use it as a sort of a playground, as a sandbox, and I just didn't feel kind of compelled to. It was just I saw the end and I was like, oh, okay. Or I saw an end. I think that there are some minor variations on what happens at the end depending on what you do. But yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, my time with it. Once I was done with it, I was done. And I think part of it was my own expectation. I thought I was going to carry on with it and didn't, which is perhaps where the only bit of sort of disappointment crept in.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly reasonable to be done with a game once you get to the end and see the credits. So that's a reasonable thing, that there isn't much beyond that. But yeah, my expectation meant that I was a bit disappointed by that. So yeah.
Well, we do have a whole episode on Deathloop, of course, which if you're watching on YouTube, there'll be a little link to that on the screen right now. If you're not watching on YouTube, you can watch on YouTube if you want. Okay, so those yeah, you can. It's a free country, it's a free society in this podcast,
and YouTube is free.
So your first two then, Deathloop and Psychonauts 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so my turn then. So I'm trying to figure out what order to do this in.
Two single player games. It's worth noting, I think, perhaps based on your own list.
Yeah.
So just remind us of what your 5 candidates are.
So mine's Halo Infinite Multiplayer, GTFO, Valheim, Loop Hero, and Resident Evil Village.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So 2 of those are single player only. 3 are co-op. Well, no. 3 are predominantly multiplayer. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about one of the multiplayer. Let's talk about Halo first. So Halo is one of my top 5, but not my game of the year. Specifically, Halo Infinite Multiplayer campaign has come out, which I have not played yet, because single player campaigns has come out, which I've not played yet, because I've been so much more interested in the multiplayer, and the co-op campaign is not out yet, so I will probably wait for the campaign until next year.
Is it a question of logistics at all here then? Do you think had this come out earlier in the year and then all those other bits and pieces had come out and you'd had more time with it, do you think it might have factored in more, or does that not really play?
I mean, if the campaign is brilliant, I hear it's good. I do hear it's good, but I don't have first-hand experience on it, which is why I've just labelled this as Halo Infinite Multiplayer. But I mean, yeah, if the campaign's really good, and if the co-op campaign is good and works well, which I imagine it will be. The game is so polished with the bits that they've released of the game are so polished, so I've got no reason to believe it wouldn't be. So yeah, I mean, if all of that stuff was available now and had been available now for I don't know, at least a few weeks, then Halo definitely did have the chance to be my favourite game of the year, I think. Yeah. But I mean, as it stands, I mean, it's a great honour for Halo to be on this list of 5 games from John Robertson. As Game of the Year 2021 candidates, put the little laurels on the
I can see the accolades trailer already. That's
yeah. So Halo Infinite Multiplayer. So I was looking forward to it for quite a while. I played all the Halo games, but I've not played all of them especially seriously. I think all the way back to Halo 3 is the last time I played a multiplayer for a serious amount of time. Halo Reach played a lot of as well, but like a lot. well, not a lot, but not a lot in comparison to Halo 3. So it's kind of been a long time since I've put a lot of effort into a Halo game, to the point that I've put effort into Halo Infinite multiplayer. And in a lot of ways, what is great about Halo multiplayer in general, and Infinite is a great example of it, is it's wrong to say that it's back to basics with FPS competitive multiplayer, but it kind of is, in that it's all about your movement and your gun, really, and how you work with your teammates. There are some sort of extracurricular stuff like the gadgets and the vehicles if you play on certain maps, but really it comes down to just how good you are with your gun, how good you are at moving, how good you are at communicating with your teammates. Those are so much more important. Not more important than things like Call of Duty, but they're really what you rely on a lot. Whereas in Call of Duty, you've got a lot more gimmicks to work with, like kill streaks and that sort of stuff, that you don't have in Halo. So when you're playing 4v4 in Halo, which I've gravitated to playing almost exclusively now. When I first started playing Infinite multiplayer and I was still getting to grips with the game, I was playing a lot of big team battle on bigger maps and with more players. But as I became more comfortable and felt like I knew the game better, I almost exclusively just play 4v4 now. The 4v4 game modes, like, Slayer, Capture the Flag, Oddball, Strongholds. And on that 4v4, like it feels like a sport. Like it really does. Like positioning is really important, both in terms of your overall map position and where you are in relation to your teammates. Communication is really important. What kind of guns you've got is really important. In 4v4, like if someone picks up like a rocket launcher, for example, then that's it. Like if that play is good, then you have to react to that and be very, very, very careful for the next however minute or 90 seconds, however long they've got the rocket launcher for. Otherwise it's just going to wipe you out. Like if you just walk around as a team of 4, then that's it, boom, one rocket shot, you're dead. So you've got to be very careful. Like it's the game, and for that reason the game feels very precisely and well balanced, because I know it's a big impact to get the rocket launcher, but it doesn't sound very big in terms of like normal game multiplayer stuff. It's like, okay, one person on a team in Call of Duty's got a rocket launcher, like, so what? In Halo, like, that can change everything. Like, you could be winning by a decent amount, and then someone gets the rocket launcher and boom, if they use it correctly, and if you don't react to it properly, then it's done for you for that period. So because it's so well balanced and on such a knife edge, all the games feel tense. Like things can just happen very quickly if you're not prepared for it, or if you haven't reacted to it very well. Or you can ruin it as well. Like if your team is the one that gets, say, the rocket launcher, and then someone's just running around willy-nilly with it, just by himself, trying to take off one enemy at a time. And the rocket misses and it sails past them or whatever, and there's no wall behind the person to blow the rocket up and get the explosion damage. Then it's just like, well, what are you doing? Like, like, please take this game more seriously.
You are holding a rocket launcher. You should treat that responsibility with the respect it deserves.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So it feels like the decisions are a bit more, I don't know. I mean, as we all know, anybody that's listened to this podcast for a while, but certainly as me and John know between ourselves, I am not a multiplayer shooter player. Is that what they're called? Multiplayer shooters? I'm not one of those. I don't run around a lot with guns. But from what I understand, from what I've heard, from what I've read, there is it sounds like the decisions are kind of weightier, and that it's less about kind of those reflexes. It's less about, like a kill streak, like you mentioned earlier, and that the time to kill is a lot higher. And so there's more, it sounds like there's more kind of psychology involved, or more room for you to feel like something can happen or is going to happen, or there's just more room for you to think, I guess, more time for you to think and make decisions, and that those decisions then can be more impactful rather than needing to react within a split second. Otherwise, you're dead. I'm sure there's moments like that too, but there's more backing it up.
Yeah, there are moments like that. The TTK, the time to kill, is high in this game compared to pretty much every shooter. Compared to like Certainly all the popular shooters. Anyway, I don't know if it's higher than like Fortnite, but that's not really a proper shooter. But anyway, yeah, the time to kill is high, so that means that while sometimes twitch reflexes are still really important, because even on the high time to kill, you still want to be the person shooting first before the other person. But yeah, those like one-off headshots and stuff, unless you've got a very specific weapon in Halo, those like just random headshots or like, you know, random snipe across the map moments that happen in other shooters don't tend to happen in Halo very much, unless you do have a sniper rifle, which is rare. So yeah, there is much more room for the psychology. Like when you're in a fight with someone and you're both shooting with each other, you're both shooting at each other, trying to break down, reduce their shields to 0 and then go for a headshot afterwards. It only lasts for a couple of seconds, but still a couple of seconds, or maybe 3 seconds, but that's a long time for a shooter. Whereas in other shooters, you can kill someone with a single shot, luckily or skillfully. But it does in that 2-3 second battle, it does, you know, your mind is racing. Like, should I push on? Should I defend? Should I call out for help? Should I launch a grenade? Should I change my weapon? Have I got time to reload? Where am I on the level? Like, am I in their base? Am I in my base? What's happening? Like, you know, you do feel a lot of stuff runs through your head very quickly, and there's room for that because of the high time to kill. There's less room for that in other shooters. That's not to say it doesn't happen in other shooters. It just happens in a different way in other shooters. It tends to all happen before the guns start in other shooters, but in Halo, it continues into and through when the guns start firing. So yeah, no, it's it's good to have it back. I'm a bit surprised at how much I like it as well, because as I say, I haven't played Halo seriously since Halo 3, and I wasn't sure how But
you have played a lot of other stuff. You've played Apex and COD and Battlefield and all of that. So yeah, it could easily come along and be perhaps quite jarring because it is quite different, but evidently you've responded to it in a good way because it's on your list of candidates.
So yes, Halo is one of my 5, didn't make the top spot. I'm trying to think what is the next best game to talk about here. Probably Loop Hero, because it's single player and also is not at the top spot. So yeah, Loop Hero, I mean, it seems silly and cliche, and I'm sure lots of reviews have said it, like, but it's got like a really addictive loop. Like, it really, really, the core gameplay loop on it is just so involving, and so complex if you want it to be. I mean, it always is complex. It's just, are you thinking about it in a complex way or not? In terms of like what cards you're putting down, and cards equate to like pieces on the board. So you might put down a piece that increases your hero's health or hurts the enemy in some way, like lowers their hit points in some way, or another tile might be the enemies spawn in this area, or you get health by going through this area. And it sounds like, oh, why would I want to put enemies on the board? That's going to make it more difficult. Yes, it will, but that's the only way to earn like certain resources that you might need to then go away and build something that you need to build. You have this like persistent village that you build between loops, and all your resources and stuff goes into building and upgrading those buildings, which then further enhance your hero or open up more classes or open up new cards to put on the board or whatever. So even though it's a roguelike, it's got a really, well, not even though, it's becoming more common nowadays, but it's got a very strong progression system in the back of it. So you're constantly earning, well, not constantly, but you're frequently earning new stuff. And there's a really interesting mechanic in it as well. It's one of the most infuriating, but also one of the most tense and brilliant things about the game, is that on anywhere in any given loop, you can pull your hero out, but you'll only earn 60% of your resources that you've gathered at that point, or you have to wait to come all the way back to your camp where you can pull them out and get 100% of your resources. But as more loops go, typically what happens is that you've got more access to better resources the deeper you go in. But obviously then the enemies are tougher, you've got, your health might be a bit battered and whatever. So it's got that the risk reward of, oh, do I do another loop and risk my hero dying? And then if they die on the battlefield, you only get like 30% of your resources that you've collected, I think. And that can be crushing if you've done like a 15 loop run or something, and you've got these amazing resources, you've got these unique resources that you've not had before. and then you die because you pushed it one too far. And you only get 30% of your resources, and the game is randomly chosen to take away the 70% of the good ones. All 70% are made up of good ones. It's oh god, it's crushing, and then you can't afford that building that you got. So yeah, it's interesting. At first, the game seemed quite simple, but it's really intricate because what you end up doing is, okay, I need certain resources to build this building before I feel comfortable to take on a boss. I want this perk that this building gives or whatever. So then you end up building your deck of cards because you can only take a certain number of cards. You end up building your deck so it's like, okay, how do I work out how to get the most wood in this run, for example? So you stack your deck so that you're getting wood resources back. So you're doing runs. You're building your deck to try to manipulate loops and runs that give you certain resources back, but then you're not guaranteed to get those resources because the cards you get are random within your deck. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with it. It's like building game, deck building game, roguelite, RPG. Like it's a really complex game that takes ideas that exist in other games, but the way that it like blends them all together, I've never played anything that feels quite like it.
It's the one game on your list that I haven't played that I really want to. It really sounds like something that I will probably respond to and spend hours upon hours playing, because it does. Yeah, a lot of that you've spoken about, the risk reward thing, the feeling like you're constantly making meaningful decisions and that there is depth rather than complexity. And that's, those two things I think should be separated. Like, you don't need to make something more and more complicated, or rather, if you do make something more and more complicated, that doesn't mean it necessarily gets any deeper. That can just mean that you've just got a bunch of disparate parts that don't fit particularly well together. This sounds like a really rewarding, really like just satisfying layering of and you're kind of often you're in control in as far as you can be, but you are choosing to layer those things on top, and how you think about the game changes over time when you start understanding how things interact. And it's that like learning the language of the game thing. I think that sounds like there's a lot in there that I will likely respond to. I'm sure I will pick it up.
It's a brilliant game. Let's say I've only had it for a week and a half or something, but like after a couple of hours playing it, you can see at that point, like, okay, yeah, this is serious. Like, this is very well thought out. It's very well executed. As I say, it feels original as well, which is quite rare given the amount of games we play and played for so long. Been playing games for so long. It's quite difficult. I think it becomes increasingly difficult to be like genuinely like taken aback regarding a game genre or the elements that it's presenting you in a certain variety, in a certain collection within the same game. But this one definitely does that.
Okay, so that's two. So Halo Infinite multiplayer and Loop Hero. I've gone through Psychonauts 2 and Deathloop. I think going on from like that notion of being surprised by a game or being just seeing things that were slightly unexpected. So Death's Door is a title that did that for me. This was a game that you'd played, I think, for a week or so before I started playing it, and then this is another game, in fact, that we did.
And then
a
you completed it before I did.
Yeah, well, it's one of those games that I got into and was like, yeah, I can really, again, it just really respond to this, and there were parts of it that kind of, it felt very Zelda-esque, but there were parts of it that kind of out-Zelda'd Zelda for me, in certainly the top-down Zeldas of old, kind of pre-Breath of the Wild. And it's a very just tightly designed, very... I think we spoke in the episode that we did on it. It's kind of there's these moments of quiet where it just lets you exist and it lets you get on with it and work things out. And there's a layering in that as well. There's like this intricacy in the way that the levels are put together and the pathways through those levels. And you progress to a certain point and you're pushing on to get to what is effectively the next checkpoint. But that checkpoint really is, in reality, is just that you then come back around to an area perhaps above where you started, and then you can drop a ladder down to then, if you die, you can then just shortcut up that ladder and you don't have to go do all the stuff that you've just done. So there's these like mini cycles or mini loops within the kind of, I think of it as like concentric circles, where it just kind of, you start in the middle and it just gets bigger and bigger as you go out, and you're revealing a bigger play area, but then you're also opening up shortcuts to get to the different parts of the area as like a meaningful part of the gameplay, not just so that, the game can kill you and then, but it's okay because it's given you a shortcut to get back there. Some of the satisfaction and the reward of the game is in working out how these areas are connected and how they link together, as not just going from A to B in a straight line, but like in this sort of, this way of expanding outwards. And it's also like, it's odd enough that it really caught my eye, really caught my imagination, because you're this bird and there's this whole narrative around where your position is in this hierarchy and this kind of society, and that impacts how people talk to you and the assumptions that are made about your role and what you're doing there and what that means. I think it's, every part of it is, considering like the previous game from Acid Nerve was Titan Souls, which was like, there's definitely similarities there.
Yeah.
But that had like a much more implied narrative, whereas this is a much more explicit one. I think there's definitely implied elements, but this is a far more, there's far more story here. And it just feels awesome as well. Like I think something that I particularly responded to was the upgrade system, which I felt it's kind of unspectacular but meaningful, and it will be just things like the time in between your sword swings or your weapon strikes is shortened by 0.25 seconds or whatever it might be. And it's the kind of thing in another game, like, I don't know, like a Civ game or a Total War game or something like that, where those are the kinds of upgrades where you just have to assume that they're doing something. It's like, your melee damage has been increased by 2.5%, and you just have to kind of take their word for it that does something. But in this game, you genuinely feel that difference, because the act of combat and the act of just movement becomes so, you become so familiar with it, because it's kind of, there's not a lot of other stuff distracting you, that you can feel it when you get those shortened timers. And that changes how you play, and that changes like the decisions that you make, because it's like, can I now go for another strike before they hit me back because my timer is shortened? And it just kind of is engaging, constantly engaging is how I found it to be. Yeah,
I think part of the reason for it feeling so good like that on the upgrade side, and that's as they said as well. Actually, we do have a Death's Door episode. So if you're watching on YouTube, you will see a little link to that right now. If you're not watching on YouTube, you won't.
As we previously established.
So on the plus 2.5% thing. So on Civ, I think the difference is that one of the differences is that in Civ you're going up against evolving states of enemies. Whereas in Death's Door, the enemies remain the same. So like that, the enemy with the pot on the head is always the enemy on the pot of the head, and always has the same hit points and always has the same moveset throughout the whole game. So the plus two attack speed matters because you're going against the same enemy as you were before. But in Civ, your plus 2 on your cavalry or whatever, well, your enemy might have just had a plus 5 on their one. So it's still a minus 3.
Yeah.
So you don't feel that same sort of impact, whereas those small impacts the small upgrades that you make here have a big impact because the enemies are kind of more static.
There's a more constant, like tangible thing to measure it against. Yeah, absolutely. That kind of relative progression does make a big difference. And I think it's one of the games that I was kind of surprised by, or pleasantly surprised by. Like I understood that it was good. I'd heard it was good. I'd seen like the Steam reviews. You'd mentioned playing it and really enjoying it. So I thought, okay, well that's great, I'll give it a go. But I wasn't expecting it, as I say, that kind of, it sounds flippant, but like the notion of out Zelda-ing Zelda, I think there's definitely things in there for me that it does that, which may sound sacrilegious and whatever, but it's a real, and I think it can be important to contextualize it in that way, because I think it's not just, oh, it's good for an indie game, or oh, it's good considering X, or because there's only a handful of people that worked on it. It's just a genuinely really, really good game, and I would recommend a lot of people to play it, because it's the kind of thing that perhaps won't get a lot of exposure, and I think it deserves. And it's just come out on, it was PC I think originally, right, and it's just come out on consoles as well.
It was PC and Xbox originally. It's now just come out on PlayStation.
It's come out on PlayStation. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth a look. But yeah, so it was a pleasant surprise. It was in its own way again refreshing, and it just has this real mood, this real atmosphere to it that I just really kind of vibed with, and it's one of those games that, talking about it, I want to go back and play it. It's like, it's that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, actually, I really, really, really enjoy the way that game feels to play. So yeah. Nonetheless, it's not my game of the year.
No, it is an excellent game though. It was the one. It was close to making my top 5, and if of your top 5, well, Psychonauts as well, but Death's Door, was very close to making my list.
Yeah. So the other, perhaps speed it up a little bit, but the other one of my games that has not made the top list, and I laugh as I say this because I think this is quite amusing, is Hitman 3. Is not my game of the year.
Why is that amusing?
Well, it's amusing because on the last episode we talked about our 5 questions episode, and Hitman was, I labelled that as my current favourite game just in general, just of all time. And there was a...
Best of all time, not best of the year.
No, well, there we are. So there's a distinction, I've made a distinction here that we talked about in that previous episode, which is that it's really Hitman World of Assassination, which is my current favourite thing, that I find myself returning to most often. And that is, for what I have of that content, is all 3 Hitmans. So since 2016 through to Hitman 3, this year's Hitman 3, plus the Hitman 2 DLC. It's the whole package. It's like the whole framework. That is the thing that I enjoy the most, kind of going back to and just playing with like a toy, which I mention every time I talk about Hitman, is this like toy feel of it.
Man just wants his toys.
Yeah, my man.
Enter toys. Hitman.
That sounds odd. So, but Hitman 3 in this context is Hitman 3 in isolation. It's not how that feeds in. It's not what that rounds out the package as. It's Hitman 3 was released this year, and that game in and of itself, I've still really enjoyed. And if you just take those distinct Hitman 3 levels, I've really enjoyed, and they're still ones that I go back to when I do dip into like the world of assassination. I'm definitely playing the Hitman 3 levels as well. But yeah, as a standalone thing, it's not my favorite thing of the year. And so, but for all the reasons, I mean, we did a Hitman 3 episode back in January, I believe it was. I also talked quite extensively about Hitman World of Assassination last week. So there isn't a tremendous sort of amount more to say about it, just that I haven't already said. That it's really just how much I enjoy interacting with kind of the clockwork nature of it, and the experimenting with just existing in its world without going in with a specific goal in mind. And it's just the game. Hitman 3 as part of World of Assassination is the game that I return to time after time. So it just is sort of it's a self-evident entry on this list for me, because it's a game I keep finding myself going back to, so therefore it must be one of my games of the year. But yeah, it's kind of a bit nebulous because Hitman 3 and Hitman World of Assassination are 2 different things. And I think that's all I will say about Hitman at this point.
You didn't mention 47's magnetic personality.
Well, yeah, the narrative is just stupendous and all the rest of it. Yeah, for somebody who likes a lot of narrative heavy things, I do love how just it's just with abandon. It's like it doesn't make narrative sense, and it doesn't need to, and I quite enjoy that. Just like, even though there is one and it sits there and there is a very specific story that it's being told, it's just whatever. That's that's not the thing that draws me to it and keeps me coming back to it.
Okay, so we know we've been through 4 of your 5 now, so if anyone's been listening, keeping track, then they will know what your game of the year is. But before we talk about that, it's my turn to go through 2 other games that did not make my number 1 spot. So let's talk first then about Valheim. Let's talk Valheim. So some people might feel that it's a bit of a cheat. Valheim's not out in 1.0 version. It came out in early access in February and it's still in early access. Anyone with a PC, anyone that ever watches Twitch may well have already played Valheim, because it was for a few months just ridiculously popular. I think it took Iron Gate Studios by genuine and huge surprise how popular it was. I don't know how popular it still is. They released a big update 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, which might have brought more people back into the game, but I don't know how many people are still playing it. But anyway, for a while, for, I don't know, 3 months maybe, Valheim was basically the only game I played in the evenings. It's well, you haven't played it, have you?
No. No, I've seen lots of it, and I would say that's unusual for you. I mean, you tend to have more games on the go than I do. I tend to be much more the kind of get into one game and play that almost exclusively. So for this to be a game that you were playing, almost, it sounded like almost it became a way of life. Like it was like your social engagements were like around Valheim.
Yeah. So there was quite a big group of us playing. I think at the peak we had like 6-7 people in the same server. So we rented our own server, because typically the way servers work in a game is that one person creates the worlds and then everyone else, that person then hosts that from within the game. So you can only play when that person's online. But we went outside of that and rented a server so that anyone could just log in at any time. So you didn't need a single person to be online to play it. And it was literally a thing where, like, so in Valheim you build bases, you explore, you defeat bosses along the way, which unlock new stuff to build and whatever. But it was really the building that was the main thing. And like at lunchtime, I'd just like go in there by myself and just be like, I'll build some more of like the outer wall, or I'll build a watchtower, or I'll go and explore where the best place for a harbour is or something. So you just like log in for like half an hour, which turns into like 5 hours. I'm expecting that you're just going to be the only one in there at like 12:30. But there'll be like 2 other people in there, just like already in there as part of our server, just already playing it. Haven't told anyone. They're also doing the same thing, probably, just like trying to get a sneaky bit in there, but too ashamed to tell anyone that they're going in there at 12:30, midday. So then, you go in there. And definitely a couple of times I went in there and like turns my marker off so they couldn't see that I was there.
Like shame Valheiming.
It's the building mainly in that game, and we built like a huge village, many buildings in there. There must have been like 10-12 buildings in there. We had like a whole farm area where we domesticated livestock. We had trenches around the base to stop like troll attacks. And it was really great. And then we kind of got overloaded on it, I think, and exhausted all the content because, this was still sort of like phase 1 early access before the big update. Haven't actually played it since the big update, but we have been making noises in our Valheim group about getting back in there. But of those sort of like shared worlds, co-op exploration, base building, resource gathering, survival games, it's the one I've been most into, because it's more private, so it's more kind of like locally based around friends and who you want to be in the server, rather than like Rust, which is just like no holds barred, everyone just screws each other over every opportunity. I don't know. It's almost like the same feeling you get from that. It's almost like a more involved, or a more not involved, but more like on the ground version of like SimCity or something. But you have to go out and collect your own resources, and you're more directly involved in things rather than seeing it like as an oversight perspective, like in SimCity. But it's the same sort of feelings. It's the same, or what I got from it anyway. Like the bosses and that are like fun and they're decent, but they're not the main part of the game. It's really just sort of seeing what you could do with these very robust, malleable building tools was the main thing, and what sort of village you could put together. And it was really neat. Like if you didn't play for like 1 or 2 days, you come in and then someone has built like this whole new thing, and it's like, oh, that's amazing. So the game really felt alive. I mean, obviously it was the players that were doing the living in the game, but the game sort of creates room for you, for that to happen. So yeah, that's 3 or 4 of my games that are not the game of the year. So the 4th game is Resident Evil Village, which is brilliant, but not quite game of the year. So when I first played Village, so I was super hyped about it. If you listen to our other episodes, we also have episodes on Village. We have an episode specifically on Village, don't we? And multiple about Resident Evil.
Yeah. At that point, it was about it being an action game. That was the episode, sort of the crux of the episode.
Yeah. So I mean, I was super hyped about Village coming out in the run up to it. I was like, there was no chance I wasn't going to play it day one, like immediately. But when I first started playing it for like a couple of hours, I think I wasn't like that enthused about it. But after that, I started to really enjoy it. I think I was a bit taken aback by how actiony it clearly was from the outset. It was very clear that this is more Resident Evil 4 than it is Resident Evil 1 or 2, which I thought was a very brave...
Or 7. I mean, that's...
Or 7, some
people
exactly.
be coming to it off the back of that as perhaps their definitive or even only Resident Evil experience. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought it was very brave to change the game so drastically from the tone and the pacing set in Resident Evil 7, because 7 was such a massive return to form, sort of reinvigorated the series, brought it back to like a sort of tier 1 megastar in like gaming property. So yeah, I think it was very brave. Some would say silly to kind of change from that formula, but the change just makes me respect Capcom even more. Like Capcom, again, we've had an episode about this, but Capcom can almost do no wrong at the moment. Like their ability to create sustained interest in franchises with Monster Hunter, Devil May Cry, Street Fighter, Resident Evil is just absolutely, like, it's close to second to none. Like, okay, then Nintendo, yeah, fine. But after Nintendo, Capcom, absolutely brilliant at sequels, and they put real value into sequels. Like, they're really worth playing. Like, the different Monster Hunter games are really worth playing. Different Resident Evil games are not wildly similar. Of course, they're more similar than different, but they're certainly not the same as one another. And yeah, 7 to Village is a very big change. And yeah, I was a little bit disappointed at first, but I don't know, once you sort of like rid yourself of the baggage almost of comparing it to Resident Evil 7, and then it starts standing in its own right.
It's like an adjustment period. You have to sort of disengage from your own expectations and then engage with what Resident Evil Village actually is, and then you can start seeing it or appreciating it for its own thing, I guess. Yeah,
and then once it's all said and done, then's the time to, I think, be looking at it in terms of, you know, missed opportunity. Would it have been better if it was like Resident Evil 7, or do I appreciate this change or whatever? It's going to be interesting, just moving on a bit, but it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the next Resident Evil, because as much as I like Village, the story in it is ludicrous. Like, I mean, it's Resident Evil, so I mean, you know, we're not expecting anything other than that. But like Ethan, the guy that you've been playing through 7 and 8 is a spoiler. He's basically made of fungus.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, right. Okay. I'm going to suspend my disbelief pretty radically.
To continue the spoiler theme, having died in Resident Evil 7. which you don't know. Like he's been
so it's
brought
classic
back by mold. Basically, it's kind of
mold. Yeah,
kind of.
it's it's you've got to suspend disbelief. But I mean, that's not really that's like a silly, almost like sideshow, really, to Resident Evil. Like what I like about Village, and this is something that some people didn't like. Like I like the fact that it is like different. The game is so sectioned off, so that here's this area, here's the swampy area, which is the worst area in the game. But here's a swampy area, here's the horrible haunted house, here's the vampire castle, here's the factory.
Yeah, and I like that too. I was just going to quickly say, I do think that perhaps caused Capcom some problems retrospectively, because a lot of people responded as we saw, passionately, shall we say, to Lady Dimitrescu and that aesthetic and that part of the game, only to find out, and the Capcom I didn't think foresaw that, only to find, like through the marketing that happened, only to find out when you get into the game that isn't very much of the game at all. That's, I don't know, like the opening few hours, right? And then it's like, it's done. And because it's sectioned off in this way that you're describing, it's done. Like you don't go back to it. It's finished. That level effectively is complete, and that's it.
Yeah, and I remember being disappointed actually that level finished and it's locked off. I mean, it's a cool boss fight at the end. It's classic like Resident Evil madness, but of boss fight at the end of that sequence. And I was a bit gutted, disappointed that, we were leaving the castle. But then the game like pulled me back around. I guess the theme of Resident Evil Village is that I was constantly disappointed by it at regular intervals, but then it always like pulled me around, convinced me again. It's like, okay, all right, I get it.
That speaks to I mean, I didn't respond to it at all really in the same way that you did. I was more played through it. I was like, okay, I see that each bit is well done. I don't have that same affinity for it, but it speaks to it, the quality of it. It sounds like that it can disappoint you and then still win you over with the next thing that it does, because there are plenty of games that are very well thought of. My mind unsurprisingly goes immediately to something like The Last of Us Part 2, where once they've lost you, people are like, no, I'm done. I'm not coming back. Or you're not winning me. Even if I stay and complete the game, you've lost me. You're not going to win me back over.
I will write an angry Reddit post imminently.
Several thousand words worth. But Resident Evil, it sounds like it was able to kind of almost clear the slate, and then here's the next thing. Here's your next course, effectively, of this.
Yeah. And I want to get it straight as well. Like, whilst I'm always looking to be impressed by Resident Evil, I'm looking for the good in it all the time. So I was very in a sort of in the position that my mind was at. I had a bias towards liking it. But I don't see that as a bad thing necessarily. Like, it does open you up to really appreciating its strengths when they do come, and not letting something else that you don't like, one element that you don't like about it, just like overshadow the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it's not. If you're writing up a professional review, then that's one thing. If you're playing it for fun for yourself, then that's so what? If you lean towards it and you're willing to overlook some of its flaws, and like you're wanting to be impressed by it, then that's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be objectively amazing for you to love it. It's like,
I would say that Resident Evil 7 is better than Village. And I'd kind of want 9, or whatever they call it, to be more like 7 than Village. Because I think you can have... Village is the kind of... It's more like Sweets Village, where it's more like a dessert. Whereas like 7 is more like a main course. Like, I can eat more savoury food, but I'm kind of done with the dessert now. Like, it's kind of that easier, kind of more in your face, more energetic form of... sustenance. weirdest comparison ever, but there you go. That's all I've got.
Okay. So Resident Evil Village / Resident Evil 8 did not make your top spot for Game of the Year, which means...
So how do we want to do this? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you what, why don't you, because I haven't played yours. I've heard of it, I've seen it, but I haven't played it. So why don't you go first?
All right.
and then we can go to mine, which we can both speak a bit on.
Yeah. Okay. So, as you'll know, if you remember my opening 5 games, well, let's just go through them. So, my nominees that didn't make it: Loop Hero, Valheim, Resident Evil Village, Halo Infinite Multiplayer. So that makes my game of the year GTFO, which has been out for a couple of years in early access. It just came out in start of November, not long before this podcast airs. It's just moved away from early access into full release. Although if you're listening to this, then you have time to get the early access price until next year. They're extending it until next year. I don't get any kickbacks for that. Just play it. It's good.
Public service announcement.
Yeah. So GTFO, it's PC only. It's by a little Swedish developer called 10 Chambers. It has got quite a lot of buzz because like the reviews that have been out of it are ridiculously positive, and like on Steam, I think it's overwhelmingly positive or very positive reviews. I can't remember, but anyway, people that play it like it.
So as a synopsis for those of people that haven't played it or even seen it, what is it?
It's a 4-player co-op, up to 4 players. You can play with fewer players, but I wouldn't recommend it. Up to 4 players co-op survival game, first-person survival game. So you're one of 4 poor sods that gets transported into these areas. I don't want to go into too much into the narrative because it will spoil it a bit, and also the narrative is very like bitty. The like there's just bits of information all around the game that you have to piece together, which I don't. I just go on Reddit and have someone else piece it together for me. So basically, so you're these 4 guys, you go in, you've got your guns, you've got tools, like some of you might have an auto sentry turret that you put up, some of you might have mines to mine up doors, or there's something called sea foam, which you can plaster on doors to strengthen them to stop enemies bursting through them so quickly. And you basically got to reach objective points and either find something in the level or get through a level safely or get through a level whilst not being able to avoid setting off all of these alarms, which causes loads of enemies to rush at you, and you've got to survive that and whatever. There's like the odd different objective type, but really it's a 4-player survival game. If we get from A to B, do some stuff on the way. Enemies are really dangerous. They will kill you, but they aren't automatically knowing of your presence. So they're blind, but they have really good hearing, and they're blind in the sense how our eyes work. They can see or sense on the infrared spectrum, but they can't see normal light as we see it. So like flashing torches and stuff at them will alert them. Anyway, that's going into too much detail. Like the game is just super difficult, super difficult 4-player survival.
Is it a very role heavy? Like what's the difference between this, in a basic way, between this and say the newly released Back 4 Blood? Like why is it?
Well, it's way slower for a start. It's way more stealth heavy. Way more stealth heavy. Like stealth is your best friend. Taking out enemies individually, silently, not alerting the horde of enemies, although the horde's not the same as in Back 4 Blood. Like here, a horde might be like 8 or 20 enemies, and Back 4 Blood might be like 100. But the individual enemies here will absolutely obliterate you, whereas in Back 4 Blood, each individual enemy is nothing really. So you got to be super careful, and that's really the main thing about the game. Really, being careful. So you have to communicate to a degree that I don't think communication has been so necessary and just a straight up necessity as in GTFO, because in a lot of co-op games, certainly ones where you're shooting guns, you're really kind of fighting by yourself. I feel like you just happen to be alongside other people that are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But in GTFO, you really have to work together to the nth degree. Not only because like friendly fire will kill your teammates, so like running around the battlefield, well, if you alert the enemies and they're all running at you and you're strafing left and right like Halo style, it's like, well, you're getting in the way of my shit. Like, I'm going to kill you from the back if you just keep doing that in front of me. So there's that level of communication, but because it's also so easy to scare or to alert the enemies and have them all rush you, and then if you're not prepared, there's a decent chance that you'll die. I mean, there are people you can go and look on YouTube, and they solo the maps, and they do all this stuff with only a hammer, and it's like, oh my god, okay. But for any normal people, it's just you can't do that. You need to slow down. Like, we'll often do this thing where we have like a safety sentry, we call it. So like we look into a room, we'll have the bioscanner where you can like see life form, see heat signatures through walls and stuff. It's like, okay, we know there's like 8 enemies that we can see on the scanner in here, might be more. It's like, okay, we'll try to stealth kill them with our melee weapons. Ammo is super precious as well, like super precious. You really don't want to be shooting if you can help it. But we'll set up like a safety sentry. So like if it all goes wrong, just run away behind the sentry and let the sentry. It won't like kill all the enemies, but it will stagger them and slow them down enough that you can just like easily kill them afterwards with your own weapons. But yeah, just that level of teamwork in deciding, constantly talking. Do we need this? Do we need that? Who's got the scanner? Who's who's mining up? Like when are we doing this? If it fails, where are we retreating back to? Who's standing where so we don't shoot each other? Who's got the spare ammo if we need to reload quickly in a fight? Like all of that stuff. Like, it just makes you feel really connected to the other players, which is the real gem in the game's sort of crown, really. Like the level of connection that it makes you feel with the other players is just outstanding. And like you get to know bits about it, almost like, when people say like, oh, when you're in like a life or death situation, that's where you really know this, that's where you really see the real person. And that kind of happens in this. Like you can see who panics quickly, who keeps their cool, like how risk averse are people, how much sort of safety net do other people feel we need, and whatever. It's it creates an interesting like window into their soul.
It sounds like clearly there's an increased importance and sort of priority put on playing roles, choosing roles, talking about those roles. It reminds me of that horror game Phasmophobia that again was kind of all the rage last year, I believe it was. That was again very much like, this is not a thing that you can do by yourself, and sure, I'm sure there are people that do, because there always are, but like it's intended to be, and everything about the game is leaning towards co-op and communication, and actually just not needing to do everything, but just needing to do the thing that you're doing well, and that's what you're there for. And there's that, like, the satisfaction comes from achieving something as a team that you probably couldn't as an individual, which most co-op games, particularly Back 4 Blood, I think, not particularly, but Back 4 Blood, because we've mentioned it already, that's how I try to play Back 4 Blood like that. I'll play it as a medic, and all of my cards are kind of towards that. But then there are people, just perhaps randoms, if I'm playing with randoms online, taking health kits and just using them on themselves. And it's like undermining that. And perhaps, what I really need is to play a game like this where you have to not just work with other people, but talk to them and actually, even if you are playing with random people, you share that moment for a little while where you're all working towards the same goal, and people aren't just like lone wolfing it or trying to, So that's, it sounds rewarding, but it sounds like hard work in a, it's a commitment. But it's like, it's rewarding.
Yeah, it is hard work. Yeah. And when you get through a level, like, it feels really, really satisfying. And you do have roles, like you say, but they're not like kind of enforced roles. It's not like, and now you're the only one that you use mini packs, or you're the only one that can give ammo or whatever. Like, everyone can do all of those things. Your differentiation comes from the guns you choose and the tool that you pick. So I've recently gone around with a bio tracker that senses heat signatures. So I'll be the one who's sort of like going up to all the doors, seeing what's behind the doors, communicating that to everyone, trying to work out a route on the map, or what we know of the map that's going to be best here. Other people, someone else we play with always uses the computers. Like, they're best at the computers. They know all the commands, because you have to like type in stuff almost like DOS to like work out where things are in the level, and ping items and stuff and whatever. So that's the same person typically does that. And then the others are like, scavenging for equipment and stuff and seeing what there is to find in the level, which is super important.
So it's role based, not in that the characters are divided up into roles, but more in that there is this stuff that needs to be done, and who's going to do what.
So you need to, you need to split and specialize into doing. You make your own sort of splitting up into different roles and specializing in those roles. And you do it for yourself. It's not enforced. It's not manipulated. It's like you can have one medic, and this is the one medic. Like, no, it's not like that. You end up taking roles because it's beneficial for you, not because the game's telling you to. Yeah. I
wonder if that's why people embrace it more, because if they're being told that they should, then they're less likely to. But if they're just like, if something is put in front of them, it's like, well, this is the best way to achieve this, so let's just do that because it makes the most sense.
Also, just one last thing, I just want to say the Discord community on GTFO is just so nice as well. Like it's so friendly. Like I've been on there and just played with randoms, like from all over the world. Like recently I played with someone from Minnesota, someone from Ukraine, someone from had a French accent. I don't know where they were from. But yeah, the people on there, like the veteran players on there, are just always so not just willing, but like excited to like go through a level with you and like teach you new stuff and give you some, because the game really teaches you nothing. Like it really doesn't. On the 1.0 version that's come out, the first rundown, the first level is pretty straightforward compared to what the opening levels were. So it has this rundown system. So every few months they'll have a new rundown. They call it rundown, like a sequence of levels. We're on rundown 6. So on rundown 7, rundown 6 will be completely deleted from the game and a new set of levels will be added. So every few months the whole game changes. The world of the game just completely replaces itself with a new one. Yeah. So yeah, GTFO is as I say, it's been out for a couple of years early access, but it came out full release.
And it sounds like it's for people that might be looking to get into it. It sounds like a good time because it is now like fully out. There's less to navigate or less to, I don't know, put up with in a way. Like it's a bit more as inviting as this game can perhaps be. It's the most inviting that it's ever been. So
yeah, and you can get it, as I say, you can get it for a cheaper price if you buy it this year rather than wait until next year. There are some other bits that are added to the 1.0 version, like there's now like a gear system we can like change clothes and that, but frankly it looks terrible. So otherwise it's a great game.
Don't worry about that bit.
Okay, so yeah, GTFO for me. So now game of the year, John Robertson, 2021 GTFO.
So similarly, just to run through the 4 that were candidates but didn't make the top of my list, they were Psychonauts 2, Deathloop, Hitman 3, and Death's Door. So that makes my game of the year 2021 Returnal. And we talked about Returnal several months ago. We talked about whether it's kind of a fair experience, a fair kind of AAA experience for new players. Does it do enough? Is it kind of unreasonable for this to be a AAA experience when it doesn't really have the trappings and the I guess things like the tutorial system or the information that it gives you that is inviting to new players. It makes you work quite hard to find out how it works and what it does. And
yeah, I think we also spoke about like, was it fair to push this as a AAA $60 game and push it in the same way as you would push like Uncharted to someone? Is it fair to have a roguelike experience of this sort positioned like that to more casual gamers?
Yeah, and so that's still a valid question. I mean, I would say, I think on that note, the recently introduced suspend cycle feature now means that for anybody coming to it now, it means that it sounds very unspectacular, but it means that you can now save and quit your run, which you couldn't do before. And there was no reason why you couldn't do that before that I could ever really understand. I don't feel like it detracts from the game in any way. This is not a question of like dumbing down. This is not a question of, it's just made it easier. It hasn't. It just literally means that, like most other games, you can stop in the middle of playing it and quit it and play something else. And you couldn't do that before. And that sounds nuts to say that in 2021. It's crazy. So I was sort of relieved. I was a little bit surprised I typed in games that came out in 2021 because my mind these days is that 2020 and 2021 have just run into each other, and was almost surprised to see that, Returnal did come out in 2021. Oh, that's awesome, because that is my game of the year. But it feels like such a long time ago that it could have easily come out in 2020 and I wouldn't have been surprised. So I went back to it recently and was playing it since this suspend cycle feature has been introduced. I would say logistically, like, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference to me, that bit, because I'm so used to playing the game without that it wasn't a thing that really ever put me off, although I could completely understand why it did for a lot of people. But it does just make it that bit easier to get into and that bit more palatable. So the things that I love about Returnal, I think, are similar to some of the things that I love about Hades, which I believe was my game of the year last year. Returnal does things in a different way. It is a roguelike that kind of, it builds on previous cycles, and you are rewarded in some small ways, but just in nowhere near the way that you are in something like Hades. The rewards aren't as, and perhaps as it sounds as well in Loop Hero, the rewards aren't as forthcoming. Some of the reward, as I think for some people as naff as this sounds, some of the reward comes from you gaining knowledge about your surroundings and the enemies you're facing, and that might be the only thing that you get out of a run, out of a cycle, a loop, whatever you want to term it. Which I can understand is, for some people, is just not enough. There's just not enough there pulling you back. But I went back and played it recently, and everything, I think, from, there's like it's silly to say, but there's an otherworldliness to it. I mean, it is literally set on an alien planet, so there would be. But there's an otherworldliness to it, even in terms of it's set on an alien planet, that it creates this mood and this atmosphere that for me is just kind of the right side of creepy, or the right side of like it, making the familiar unfamiliar. It kind of, there's like a Lovecraftian thing going on with it, that it twists things, and it just makes, like, from the music to the sort of the world design, and the narrative that's threaded through that, there's just enough of you not really understanding what's going on, or thinking that you do, but it's just a little bit off. Things are just like, it's like that thing of catching something out of the corner of your eye and thinking it's one thing, and then you turn and it's something else. It's all of that in terms of a tone and a mood works brilliantly for me. And I play with headphones on, and it's just like, it really is a game that absorbs me. And then it just feels awesome to play. Like, I love the layers of it and how I've kind of leveled up as a player, and things that I remember used to be really challenging for me are no longer challenging. Not because I've unlocked a load of extra gear and I now can just take things in my stride, but because I, as a player, have leveled up, and the decision making is now sort of cranked up a few gears. And I'm thinking much more about like when to use certain consumables and when to activate like adrenaline to level up my adrenaline if that's been knocked down to 0. And like, there's just a lot of, I think it's this notion of like learning the language of the game, and that has changed me from just trying to survive the game to actively taking the game on and looking for specific things and looking for like the meta progression.
It sounds like you've become Neo after he figures out how to interact with the Matrix.
There is do you know, I think, but like with any game, like, and I'm sure you've had sort of a similar thing with, I don't know, something like Apex or certain things where you go into it, or GTFO, or perhaps any of the games that you've talked about already, but you go into it understanding it on one level, and then you realize there's so much more to it. And it's that thing of like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And it's like, oh, okay. And I like that. I like that that's all there before me, and it's there for me to go and chase, rather than it being kind of very neatly handed to me, which is, I kind of say that, I don't mean to sound that sound negative, or like it's, you know, like games that don't do it this way are pandering to the player, because that's not true. But I do like the pursuit. I like that it's like something for me to really get my teeth into and to think a lot about.
Is there an element as well of because I don't know if you know, but like if you like learn a musical instrument, for example, then there's a certain point where the instrument just clicks, right? And then you're suddenly much better. And this happened to me learning a couple of different instruments. And literally, you go to bed one day and you don't feel that good or that confident, and you get up the next day and you play, and it's like, wow, like I'm so much better now. Like it's all suddenly clicked. And I think what that actually is it's you becoming, I don't mean to sound like so cliche, but it's like you becoming one with the instrument in the sense that you're no longer saying, okay, how do I play this chord? How do I do this chord? How do I do? And then a lot of your mental function is going on the actual mechanics of playing that chord or playing that transition or whatever. And it's now just about, how do I know how to play that chord intimately. So now how do I just do the best thing with that? So you're focusing on the art rather than the creation, rather than the craft.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens in video games as well, in that suddenly the game clicks and you're no longer kind of consciously thinking, how do I shoot? How do I aim? How do I link the aiming into the movement and whatever? You just know the game so intimately that it's all just about action at that point. It's about how do I use these things that I'm now I'm one with in a you've mastered it to an extent, basically.
Yeah. I think it absolutely is that. Yeah, I've kind of stopped thinking about the building blocks and the individual notion of a melee attack, and I now understand intrinsically it feels like just in terms of distances and timings, and do I have enough time to get to that enemy to melee them before they fire and hit me and then disrupt my adrenaline.
And all of that is happening in a split second.
Yes, and then once you have that level of understanding, you then start seeing it in a different way, like you described, a bit like Neo. Like you start understanding how things interact, and you start making decisions on a different level, and you start tackling things in a different order, or choosing to go into a room with loads of enemies because you can then build up your adrenaline, because then that means you can collect more of the ooblets or ooblites, the currency, once your adrenaline's higher, which means you can then get access to so there's a lot of levels of interaction where, even though on the very first level, for me at least, the very first layer of decision making was still rewarding and exciting, clearly it was rewarding enough to sort of persevere with it, where other people felt it was a bit too prickly or they just didn't like it. And then it feels like there's just constantly more tiers and levels of decision making to be made. Yeah, and it's just incredibly rewarding, and to just just moving around and the actual art of combat in the game is just very satisfying. I'm not blind to its flaws by any means, but it is, having gone back to it recently, it feels really good. It's like, oh yeah, I remember how this, I had to, familiarize myself with the controls of, that's how that feels. And then it's done. It's like, okay, I'm good to go now. And there's just a million things of you can choose how you interact with it. You can choose how long a run you do, whether you hit every room, do you just get to the next biome as quickly as possible? How do you want to play it, basically? And I think a lot of the games on this list are like that. It's like, how do you want to interact with this game? And it will give me something back based on that decision. So, Returnal is my game of the year 2021.
All right, so there we have it. GTFO and Returnal, game of the year. Two very grim worlds.
Happy Christmas.
What a cheerful 2021 it was. Let us know what you think your not what you think. Let us know what your game of the year is. Do you agree, disagree with any of the nominees, any of the candidates that we have offered up? Let us know on Twitter. We are at Indie by Design. We're at Indie by Design on all social media networks. And you can also visit us at indiebydesign.net, where you'll find information on all of the books that we have written and released, including 20 Double Fine Years, which we mentioned earlier, which does feature Psychonauts 2 and features quite literally every other game that Tim Schafer and Double Fine have created. Otherwise, I guess all that's left to do is wish everyone a happy Christmas, and we'll be back properly in the new year, so we'll see you then.